The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Again, Jesus left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee, into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment, and begged him to lay his hand upon him. Jesus took him off by himself, away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears, and spitting, touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned, and said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And immediately the man's ears were opened. His speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. Jesus ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he told them, the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
It's very interesting how these three readings, these three tiny selections from the entire body of the scriptures that we have, that we call the Bible. It's very interesting how these three tiny selections really fit together and reinforce each other. First, of course, in chronological order, we've got that wonderful prophecy of Isaiah. Isaiah was writing at a time when the people needed a message of hope because their situation, for a variety of historical reasons, was totally hopeless. And he conveyed that message of hope to them and compared their current situation, like the burning sands of the desert and the thirsty ground during a drought. And he says, the burning sands will become pools of water, the thirsty ground, springs of water, bursting forth in abundance of that which gives life. Then we have the gospel. Jesus standing in the middle between that prophecy and the despair of the people to whom he was speaking, and ourselves. Jesus fulfilled that prophecy. Jesus brought about an era, a time of God's reign, the new kingdom that would be unalterably a kingdom in which the life-giving resources of creation and of redemption that promises eternal life, not bound up to or bound by the limitations of this creation, he not only promises that, but he fulfills it. Beginning with Jesus, we are living in a new era. It's not up to us to bring it about. It's not up to us to make the will of God happen in bringing forth this new life. Jesus has already done that. What is up to us is to live accordingly. And that's where James fits in. James, in fact, is perhaps, some scholars will say it's one of the earliest works of the New Testament. And it's very evident that James was, unlike Paul, James was not writing from the perspective of a mission to the Gentiles, to people who were not Jews, who did not have the heritage of God's revealed covenant with his people. James was writing to the people of that covenant. So he did not see himself as bringing a completely new order that Jesus brought, as Paul did to the Gentiles, but rather James saw that Jesus is the fulfillment of the way of life that they already possessed as Jews living under the covenant that God had already made with their ancestors. And so James says, you are part of a new fulfillment. Live accordingly. And what does living accordingly mean? Put aside those things that cause division, that cause partiality. Put aside those very natural things that sometimes afflicted even the most religious of people. In Jesus' times, the Pharisees looked down on everyone else because they were not fulfilling the religious command of God properly. The Sadducees looked down on everyone else because they were not fulfilling the command of God properly. The Essenes looked down on everyone else because they were not fulfilling the will of God as manifested in his commandments. And the Zealots looked down and even so much scorned everybody else as enemies that the Zealots were, in the first century, the equivalent of terrorists today. And James is saying, those factions cannot have a part of you. Now, even religiously, many people at that time who enjoyed prosperity saw their prosperity as a result of their way of life. God gifted them because they were so good. And that means that the people who did not share in that prosperity, there is something wrong with them. They are not so good. And so divisions arose between us and them. The point that James is making, which is the point all through the Gospels, is that those divisions can have no place among us who are partakers of the new covenant that Jesus himself has brought about. So that little story that he tells about when you gather to worship, gather in your assemblies, make room for those who are less well off. Without judging, it's their fault. Without judging between our friends and those others. We must all be one. Now, what does that mean for us today? James is calling people to live according to the new order that God has already brought about. It's not up to us to bring about the kingdom of God. He already has. It is up to us to live accordingly. And what that means to us is to meditate, to pray, to listen, to take seriously all of the words of Jesus, calling us together as his disciples to be one among ourselves so that we may be able to proclaim by our actions, more than our words, that God the Father in Jesus loves all, so that we may become instruments of that love. It's tempting to end my homily there, but those who know me know that I rarely do that. So I do have one point that flows from this just perfectly that we have to pay attention to. What is it that blocks us from love? It's not hatred. It's fear. Fear keeps us from fulfilling. Even fear keeps us, I think, from really listening to the command of Jesus. What's the commandment of Jesus? Well, we sometimes think it's love God above all things and love your neighbor as yourself. That's very nice, but he was quoting the Old Testament law. What is the new commandment of Jesus? He tells us at the Last Supper. Love one another as I have loved you. In other words, your own love for yourself is not the model for how you love others. The way that I love you is the model for how you love others. And throughout his life and teaching, Jesus repeatedly tells us what that love means. Are you ready for it? Love your enemies. If you only love those who love you, he says, so what? Everybody does that. The way that you're going to be a distinctive follower of Jesus Christ, if you wish to undertake that, is to love your enemies. Pay particular attention to those who are in some way threatening to you. We cannot escape that command. But that command of love of enemies and of the corollary to that of forgiveness without limit, not retaliation, not self-defense, not protectionism, not try to do better than the other, but forgiveness without limit. How do we do that? Well, this commandment of love of enemies is actually, in its various forms, the second most repeated commandment in the New Testament by Jesus. What's the first one? What does Jesus command to his followers more than anything else?
Love one another.
Do not be afraid. Do not fear. It is fear that blocks us from that love.